For today's event turns out to be very well chosen. We're at an important moment at the conclusion of the Obama administration, an opportunity to look back at the legacy of the past 8 years and look forward to and project at least the next 4 years under President-elect Donald Trump. Our first conversation today is titled The Military's Readiness Crisis. It's a real honor to be joined by Chairman Mac Thornberry, who chairs the House Armed Services Committee for this discussion. He'll be moderated in the conversation by Senator Jim Talent. At this session, and like all sessions, the two of them will have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to conversations from the audience, so look forward to your participation. For those of you at home, and also those of you here, highly recommend that you please join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag FPI Forum. To briefly introduce Senator Talent, he is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's also the director of the National Security 2020 project at the Maryland Ware Center for Security Studies there. He represented the state of Missouri in the House and Senate and served on the Senate Armed Services Committee during his time in the Senate. Since he left the Senate, he has served on 2 independent reviews of the Quadrennial Defense Review in 2010, 2014. Highly recommend in particular the 2014 report of the National Defense Panel, and would also recommend, take a moment to hold up, he was a contributor to this 2015 AEI report to rebuild America's military, which is really invaluable reading as we address some of the questions that he'll be getting into with Chairman Thornberry. As a final courtesy note, ask that you kindly put your cell phones on silent as a courtesy both to our speakers and to your fellow guests today. Senator Talent, I thank you, and Chairman as well.
Thank you, Chris. It's great for me to be here with you, and especially to be here with Chairman Thornberry, and we're going to have a conversation. It's going to touch on a number of topics and then take some questions. I'm going to talk first about readiness, and I want to say before I ask you the first question, we're going to talk about the current readiness of the military, and I think we can safely say the report's not really very good at all, and a lot of things you can say in the last few years are responsible for that, but a lot of agents and agencies, but not the House Armed Services Committee. And we are grateful for your leadership and the consistent way that you have stood up for American security and the men and women of America's armed forces. So welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So I thought we'd get at this by giving you an opportunity to talk about the personal tour that you've engaged in recently in a number of American military installations, and I think you followed some of those abroad and asked a lot of questions and learned a lot of things, but really talked about day-to-day readiness issues a lot as well. So maybe you can talk about what you found and what the implications of it.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I appreciate your kind words, but I have to say I did not fully appreciate the state of our readiness and the damage that has been done by sequestration, by the high pace of operations, a combination of factors. And at least until I started talking with the people who are trying to live with it every day. And as you mentioned earlier in the year, I started traveling to various installations here at home, talking to pilots, aircraft maintainers, and others. And some of their stories you just can't forget. For example, one of the pilots brought me over to his F-18 and said, you know, Ronald Reagan sent this plane to bomb Gaddafi in 1986. It's my plane. Something when I was in flight hit part of the plane. I had damage, but we couldn't get the part to fix it. So this is the pilot talking. I'm taking my family through a military museum and see an F-18 on static display there in the museum and get the bright idea that maybe I could borrow a part off the museum aircraft. So he had to work his way through the museum bureaucracy and then, of course, through the DoD bureaucracy to make all this happen. Took a part off the museum aircraft. It actually turned out that the holes were drilled in inappropriate places. So back in the early 80s, you know, it didn't exactly fit. He had to come up with a plan B, but as I continued to talk with others, getting planes out of the boneyard, and then it extends beyond the flying. We've had testimony from a Navy captain. His ship was tied up at dock so that they could take 13 parts off of it to put on other ships that had to deploy right away. So what we're doing is cannibalizing, and then what goes with that too is we don't have enough aircraft available for training, and our folks are not getting the training they're supposed to get. And so you just get this cycle that is headed downward. Until you talk with and one other thing, so you have these old aircraft, to stay with airplanes for a second. What you do is you're really stressing your maintainers to keep them flying. So I've talked to maintainers that said, I'm not seeing my family any more at home than I was when I was deployed, because we are literally working 7 days a week, often 12 hours a day. You get the depots backed up, and again, you get this cycle that just gets worse and worse. So you're right. I followed one squadron to the Middle East. I saw the problems they were having getting ready to deploy. Once they got over there, they took a plane just to borrow stuff off of. They have not enough experienced pilots, so they have to manage the experienced pilots and less experienced pilots in their missions and so forth. Maintainers working around the clock. Are they pulling off? Are they bombing ISIS in this case? Yes. Is it an incredible stress on the force? Yes. And it takes its toll over time. So I think what we are seeing, and it's not just anecdotes, you're seeing it in accident rates for all the services going up. You're seeing consequences build of these readiness shortfalls, and we've got to turn it around. Last thing I'll say is I just think it is morally wrong to send people out on missions for which they are not fully supported and fully prepared. And we're kind of doing that. Yeah. We're not fully supporting them now, and that's wrong. We have to turn it around no matter what.
That's a powerful statement. And as you know, if those problems are existing, and they are across all the services, we know that day-to-day readiness is one of the last things the system wants to sacrifice because it's embarrassing to everybody. So if they're sacrificing that, what does it say about the long-term readiness issues that you've also talked about so well?
Yeah, and I do think we make a mistake. Both the military and those who are around it a lot by seeing readiness as some sort of a code for just a unit. It is broader. And so the only way you're going to make some of these aircraft squadrons ready is to get new airplanes. You can only do so much with the 1980s that are way beyond their flying hours. And you can say the same with ships, all sorts of things. So I do think it's important to look at readiness more broadly, not just units, but individuals, and also our capability to deal with the variety of threats, high end to others that we face.
And the irony is that this is happening because of the desire to save money, and yet it will cost so much
Absolutely.
More, as you know.
Absolutely.
And you warn the colleagues, you tell the colleagues, it's cutting off your nose to spite your face, but getting a concentration of energy and will to do something about it is a lot harder.
Yeah, it's like not patching your roof and just letting it go. Well, one of these days you're going to have water in your house, and just think about the cost of that. And so just kind of that small example we can all relate to writ large across the U.S. military, that's what we're facing.
I love your museum example. Is that what I was thinking when you were talking about it was, well, when we do finally take some of these platforms off the line, somebody's going to show up at the Antique Roadshow with one of them, the P-52 or something, and say, what can I sell this for? Yeah. You got to laugh or cry. So we have a new president coming in who gave what I thought was an outstanding defense speech with a very good defense plan over the summer. love for you to comment on that if you want to. But one of the things I liked about his plan is the emphasis in it, not just on capabilities, on technological, the technological edge that we're losing and that we need to maintain, but also he did focus on numbers, on capacity. And there has been a tendency in the last few years, I know in these, Chris mentioned the defense panel and others, for people to get so in love with capability, the third offset, which is, all that's important, that they forget numbers matter too. So you want to comment on either on his speech or on that issue or how you see that going forward?
Yeah, well, I agree. I think his focus on rebuilding the military is exactly right, as was the piece that you wrote that Chris mentioned. And numbers do matter. I mean, part of the reason we're challenged right now is we don't have enough aircraft. I'll just continue with that example. And so the ones we have, we are flying more and more hours. And that's part of the cycle of how hard it is to get things ready. If you don't have enough and what you've got, you're just flying the wings off of. But what else is true, recently I was in the Asian Pacific region, that you can have more capable ship. We have this debate all the time with the Obama administration. You can have a more capable ship, but it can still only be in one place at one time. So you have to have numbers to cover geography. And these days, when you have such a huge array of threats from Russia and China's aggressive action, Iran, North Korea, not to mention terrorists that not only have not gone away but are spreading out in more places, there is no substitute for numbers. And final point is, like with aircraft, we can wear out our people as well. And so day after tomorrow in the House, we will pass this year's conference report for the Defense Authorization Bill. One of the primary features is we stop the drawdown on end strength in all the services, especially acute for the Army. So part of what has happened is we have drawn down the numbers so much, we have worn people out. And so for the Air Force, we're 700 pilots short, we're more than 4,000 maintainers short, partly because the airlines are hiring, partly because we're wearing our people out,
right.
And they just can only do so much.
I'm co-chairing at the Bipartisan Policy Center a task force on personnel with Secretary Panetta and Jim Jones. And when you really get into these subjects, as you know, it is quite interesting what you find. But one of the things that we're seeing is that all throughout the force, one of the reasons morale is suffering so badly is that people feel like they're having to do 2 or 3 jobs instead of one. And they'll do that in a wartime, okay? But you mentioned stress. Over time, these are volunteers. They don't have to stay.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, really, Mac, that the force has held up, I think, as well as it has.
It is a credit to them. And just one last point on this. When you do the drawdowns, like they're in the process of doing, who are you losing? Mm-hmm. You're losing the people with some experience and so forth. So you lose that capability. Even if you try to turn it around tomorrow, you're not replacing the experience. You're bringing in a new recruit, got to go through the training and so forth. So the best thing is don't lose them to begin with.
Don't lose them, because building them up will cost more and take time.
Yeah.
You also tend to lose warfighters because, and to some extent, this is the whole tooth-to-tail ratio, and I know you've worked on getting that, reduced. But part of the problem is they have to sustain, so let's take the Army. You do have to sustain the institutional Army in order to be able to continue as an organization, which means that your end strength cuts are going to fall primarily in the brigades and in the warfighters, which is exactly, what we want to see out there in the field. So, yeah, capacity important going forward, and we can all, and I'm sure you'll be working on this with the new administration, figure out, okay, what is the right capacity, but at minimum we don't keep drawing down. I want to talk, because we've been talking, about the decline in our strength as a result of all these factors. But that decline, when you talk about the strength of the American military, it's always relative to the missions that they have to perform and the threats that they're confronting, right? So it's part of the danger is that we're not only gradually getting weaker, maybe not so gradually, but many of the potential adversaries we're facing are getting stronger. Do you agree with that? And you,
no
share
question.
any concerns?
Well, 2 years ago, when I first became chairman, we had a number of hearings. Senator McCain did the same in the Senate, just state of the world. And among others, Henry Kissinger made the comment that probably never before have we faced so many serious, complex threats all at the same time. In addition to that, over the past 18 months or so, our committee's had a number of classified, unclassified sessions where we look at our eroding technological advantage over others. And this is another area that in some ways may have kind of crept up on us, but now if you look at it objectively, we are clearly less superior than we have been in the past. So you look at what Russia and China are doing, where they are making their investments. It is directly focused on the way that we conduct warfare and poses a real danger. Whether it's nuclear deterrence, whether it is all the various cyber or counter space activities, and a variety of other capabilities that
the integrated air defenses they're coming up with.
Absolutely. And so you look at that on the Russia side. You look at some of the missile work that cruise missile work that China is doing. And they're not the only ones, because you see Iran and North Korea accelerating their missile testing, among other things. Even ISIS is getting more sophisticated in its use of cyber. So the point is, we have this huge array of threats, more than we have ever faced, and their sophistication is growing, and we've got to deal with it all. And I think that's the key factor. A lot of people say, well, we spend so much more money than all these other militaries combined. We also have responsibilities more than anybody else combined. And without us, others step into the vacuum. And I think we're started to see some of that in more aggressive activity and in the world.
Yes, I too deal with that. Oh, well, we spend more than other countries combined. And I've thought about how best to capture the right response, because it's a fair question. I mean, we want people to ask questions like that. But I think you have to have apples to apples. So what are we spending vis-a-vis potential adversaries in their regions of the world? So you take China, which admits to spending, 140, 150 billion a year, and is probably half again that much. Virtually all of the power they're getting out of that is concentrated in East Asia and in their near seas. So the question is, are we spending the equivalent of several $100 billion a year in order to be able to maintain presence in that part of the world? And the answer is no. So we're like a company that's trying to market in all 50 states, and one of its regional competitors is spending 3 times as much in 5 states as you're spending in those states. You're going to lose market share in those states. So you're really correct. We're going to go to questions in just a minute, so be thinking about it. But I want to have, time goes by so quickly. I think I do want to make certain that we touch on industrial base issues, because when you look at the buildup, and this is a difference between now and 30 years ago when Reagan did this. So we have an incoming president-elect who I believe is committed to a major rebuild of America's armed forces, but he doesn't have, in my opinion, anywhere near as robust a defense industrial base as President Reagan did. Maybe that's overstating it, but would you talk a little bit about that?
I think it's self-evident. We are down to 1 or maybe 2 suppliers in many instances. If you talk to the major defense contractors, they are very dependent many times on a single subcontractor for various components. And much of the reason for that has been the erratic budgeting that has come from our political system, or has not come from our political system. So CRs, all of that has taken a toll on our industrial base. One of the things, as you know, one of the areas I have focused on has been acquisition reform. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is I have grown increasingly concerned that innovative companies that do commercial work and do work with the government are going to make the decision that it's just not worth messing with the government. And they're just, and I've had executives with some of them tell me that has been their calculation. It's just not worth it. And you think about the way the world is moving, the investments that our adversaries are putting in. If we lose the innovation that comes from a whole series of companies in our economy, we are going to have a very difficult time defending the country. And so we think of the industrial base as the prime defense contractors, which is absolutely true. They're essential, but really it's a much larger group, and we have made it very hard to do business with the Department of Defense. And we have made it very slow to take advantage of their innovations. Mm-hmm. So while it is really important to get more value for the money we spend, what is even more of a driver for me is we have to be faster. We have to be more agile in fielding the best technology that will protect our people better, but also meet the adversary. And to do that, we've got to have a better acquisition system and the industrial base, improving those relationships. It's been a very hostile one in recent times. I understand they're in it to make money. There's got to be arms linked transactions and all that, but we need to get back to everybody being on the same team for the same purpose in order to harness that tremendous innovation that's in the American economy.
Yeah, a lot of this, and then we'll go to the questions because I could monopolize the chairman for the whole hour, but I want to go to your questions. A lot of that is creating a deeper understanding and mindset among the colleagues, and even within the defense or the press that's covering these things, and obviously a lot of the trade press understand it, of how this system works and what kind of oversight and what kind of standards to hold them to are appropriate. When they really are performing pretty well, and when the $400 hammer shows that something is really wrong. And that's hard to create that. I know a big part, and we'll close with this, because one of the big things that the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee has got to do is to help his colleagues in the House understand how this hugely important but very different part of the government works. And most of them will come into office having looked at health care and looked at education, looked at these other issues, but they don't really understand this. So how do you see your role in that, and how do you think that's going? That's a question you don't get every day.
That is true. There's always more work to do. For me, it starts with members of my committee. So we have had a lot of informal conversations with people that help, I think, get a better feel for that. But for example, a couple months ago, I took 20 or 30 folks over to the Pentagon, and we walked around a little bit, got to hear firsthand from many of the service chiefs. I do think, for all the reasons we've been talking about, nearly all members of Congress feel a responsibility when it comes to national security.
I agree with that. They absolutely do.
But as you're right, it is in many ways not something that many of them are used to dealing with. Except we do have some key veterans who have been elected, and so they bring their perspective.
Bases in their district, and that's. I don't want to overstate.
But I think you're right. I think there is a hunger for members to understand better what's happening in the world, about our military capability, and so part of our job is to help provide the information, but also just the understanding,
right?
The
framework
about how that works. Now, the rest of the story is I don't want to just explain to them how this very complicated bureaucratic system works. Part of our job is to reform this very complicated bureaucratic system and streamline it. And so, again, the bill we're going to vote on day after tomorrow reduces some of the bureaucracy, begins to reorganize some of the functions at the Pentagon, my friend Senator McCain says the most extensive reorganization since Goldwater Nichols in '86.
Which he remembers.
But we're not done.
All right, I am going to be a little more disciplined than you probably expected, and I'm going to stop and take questions. So, Chris, do I just call on people? Is that what you want to do?
Yes, and there will be mics for the
Okay, so I think this hand went up first.
Hi, I'm Pat Hose with Defense Daily. Chairman Thornberry, I understand that you take Frank Kendall's position and basically split it up into two. You got a chief technology officer and an undersecretary for engineering. How is that going to improve the speed of which you get new technologies into the field if you basically take one decision maker's position and make it into two decision makers' positions?
The concern is that we have put too much under AT&L. Whatever I say is certainly no criticism of Frank Kendall, who I think has done a very good job. But I am persuaded by those people who say that it is essentially impossible to make the person who is responsible for buying things efficiently the chief innovation officer as well as many of his other duties. As you know, the Senate bill had a very significant reorganization. What we have agreed upon for this year is to separate out some of these functions, but also delay implementation for a year to allow the new administration to come and look at it, but also to allow us to study more carefully what the right way is and what the implications are. You know, part of the challenge with all of these reform efforts is you can't take a break and rearrange things and then start again in 2 weeks. You got to do the job every single day. So you still have to make sure the rifle gets to the guy in Afghanistan tomorrow while you are trying to improve innovation and reform acquisition and so forth. So this is a first step in recognition that we have lost something on innovation. It's probably not the final answer.
So you're satisfied so far with the compromise on AT&L?
Well, I think it's the right thing for now. But it will continue to be as I said, we're not done on organizational reform, on acquisition reform, on some of the personnel reform issues. So I think this is a good step for now. There is more work to be done.
All right, this gentleman here.
Chairman Thornberry, you spoke a little bit about the need for new aircraft. And the first aircraft that I think of is like the F-35, which the program has been delayed for a long period of time, has gone over budget. Could you speak a little bit about how the U.S. government could acquire new assets without that happening again, without going over budget or without being delayed by that significant period of time?
Well, part of what we've tried to think about over the last, and really we started this in November 2013, is to understand the problems for the F-35, for the Ford aircraft carrier, for Future Combat System. We've had some problems in the past. And one of the things I think we can learn is that when you define requirements at the beginning, it's a very important thing, and you really need to make it difficult to change those requirements. You try to put too much innovation into a new platform, it will inevitably delay its fielding and increase the cost. And there, I just had a member last night on the floor talk to me about visiting some of the bases, training bases for the F-35. Problems are being worked through. The computer issues they've had, the helmet issues, and so they're working through them. But you're right, if it's over budget, it's too long. If it takes us another 20 years to field the next aircraft, we're going to be in real trouble. So that's part of the reason this year's bill, we really focus on incremental improvement and not committing to buy 1,000 of something until we know that it works, and have a separate funding stream for some experimentation. We need to experiment, but you can't experiment as you're building a program of record. And so trying to learn the lessons of the problems we've had in the past is important. The answer is not to not build another airplane. The answer is to make these gradual steps.
Can I just add one thing? And I'm going to stick up a little bit for the department here. I say this as a person who's been writing about acquisition reform, as you know, and when I was there. Part of this is the result of when you know you're not going to have you don't have the money to buy all the platforms that you really think you're going to need. So you're going to get one plane. So that the pressure to put as much as you can in that plane becomes very strong. Now, yes, I think I'm not trying to say that's the only reason, but I think we've seen that. I think that hurt future combat systems a lot.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Because we got this one thing, so we have to do everything we want to do.
And I mean, I was there, you were there when we started F-35. The idea of having a common platform that then would be adapted for the different services, well, that could work. But it was much more complicated, I think, than anybody realized.
Well, we could do a whole hour on that idea and how that's affected. As you know, I'm going to go back there to that gentleman there who's been waving his hand. I think we're going to get a real good question here.
That's true.
I mean, there's no way to pick these sorts of things.
Tony Bertuca, Inside Defense, representing the Noble Defense Trade Press. Hello. For Chairman Thornberry, in the compromise version of the authorization bill, you ended up halting the end strength decreases, but billions got stripped out in planned weapons increases for F-35s and LCS and everything else. My question is, do you plan to come back for those in the next legislative cycle? Do you think those remain high priorities and you're going to try to get them authorized next year? And for Senator Talent, you praised the incoming administration. Have you had any discussions perhaps about playing a role in that administration, maybe in a building with 5 sides? Thank you.
You want to go first?
I'm just happy you get a question like that.
You have to answer.
Yeah. My hope is that the new administration will come to us with a supplemental request as soon as they get their feet on the ground. It was disappointing that in order to get this bill done now and to stop the in-strength hemorrhaging, that we were not able to have as much funding as the House had originally had. As I mentioned before, the only way you're going to fix some of these old airplanes is to build a new airplane, and so that's part of what we had. But my hope is, and I think across the aisle, recognition of the fact that sequestration, 21% cut over 4 years in the defense budget, as well as the pace of operations, has taken its toll. So there is, I think, interest to try to make up some of that ground. And what I hope is the new administration will come with a supplemental and that we can put back, and for me, the top of the list would be the things that had to drop out now, and then, of course, go to next year's budget as well.
Well, I'd love to see a supplemental, too. I really love the President-elect's defense speech when I read it. I love the tone. I love the issues he took on and the way he took on. And I'm going to support that, whether inside or outside of government. I would be very interested in doing something inside of government. I have had some discussions with the transition, but I also know enough about cabinet building, having watched it in a number of instances, that he has to pick the people that fit. That he feels the most comfortable with, and that also fit the overall pattern. And they're working their way through that and making a lot of progress. And I've been watching and pleased with the appointments I've seen so far. So they're going to work it out. But I'm going to support that plan inside or outside of government because there isn't anything more important to America's national security, or I would also argue to Donald Trump's domestic agenda of regrowing the manufacturing base in this country. And I think it's been an untold story. He's starting to tell it, that one of the reasons we've lost a lot of manufacturing capacity is because we have underfunded these procurement programs over time. Yes, sir. And then I'll go back over here.
Peter Humphrey, I'm an Intel analyst and a former diplomat. Wondering about two things. In what fantasy world did preparation for two major regional conflicts disappear? And secondarily, the future is made of swarms of small things. How do we get the Pentagon to realize you want to buy 1,000 Toyotas instead of one Lexus? They keep missing the boat on that and creating giant aircraft carriers. One torpedo takes out, a huge amount of our capability. That's crazy.
Both good questions. I've already forgot the first one. The 2M Street. I think this year's defense bill will abolish the QDR. Too much time, effort for nothing. And part of our frustration is that it became a budget justification document, not really a strategy document. And so that really gets to what you're talking about. We have adjusted the 2MC kind of approach just based on the budgets, rather than the other way around. Rather than looking at the world, trying to see, okay, what sizing construct makes sense for the world we're facing, and then develop the budgets to support that. So we have provided a different system of kind of thinking about the world with an outside group at the beginning, and not trying to recreate the QDR, but trying to do this differently, because that has definitely not been successful. I think there are people in the Pentagon who are very interested in this swarming idea, and I certainly am. I have had a number of folks that have provided me with some material to read and help think about this, whether we're talking satellites or whether we're talking other sorts of capability. But you get to the heart of an issue, you can think about and say, okay, that makes sense, but still you have cultural bias in a certain direction within the institution. And I think part of our job in Congress is to break through some of this cultural bias that prevents us from looking at these different options. I don't mean mini small is always the answer to everything, but we have to look in that direction, just the cost-benefit ratio, and for a host of reasons. So I think it's not that concept, as well as others, is maturing. It is involved in some of the third offset stuff, and again, part of our job is to nurture that, even when the institutional interests are to squash it.
That's a great answer. If I can just add one thing on that, I think you're so correct that it's a balance that you need. And we were talking before about the perceptions of Congress as an institution. The larger body of people outside of the committees who have a role to play in this decision making. And this is what I think the building needs to understand, is that those people like to see tangible things for the dollars that they spend, right? So, and they're not all that up on, necessarily on all the gradations and differences, but when you spend a lot of money on planes, you like to see planes. And I think if the Pentagon understood that that's a way to make everybody feel as if we're getting value for dollars, then there's going to be a little bit less pressure on some of on the bigger programs to produce very quickly. So there's a perception issue involved here too, as well as I think one with force structure. So let's take one more, which I'll let the chairman answer rather than sticking my nose in. Okay, I said I'd come back over here. We'll get this gentleman right here.
Thank you. Congressman, I have a question about technological superiority and specifically with regards to Russia. So when it comes to Russia's military capabilities, we haven't seen it in a real peer-to-peer scenario in quite a while. And given sort of the dubious nature of its T-14 Armata tank and the new fighter jet it wants to field, and especially with regards to the industrial base of Russia, is it possible that we are overestimating Russian capabilities with regards to a military scenario with the USA? And if we reorient ourselves towards a peer-to-peer scenario, will we lose out on the capability to wage the kind of wars that we usually do, which is against technologically inferior enemies? Thank you.
Well, I do think the point is we have to be prepared for the range of contingencies. So there are folks who say, okay, counterterrorism and counterinsurgency is behind us. We need to just focus on the high-end threats. We don't have that luxury. We have this huge array from sophisticated to less sophisticated threats around the world, and we have to be ready for them all and maintain competency for them all. But it is true that the 15 years of where we have focused on counterterrorism have meant that we have neglected training and other things for the high-end sorts of threats. I think we're pretty clear-eyed about the threat that Russia presents. I don't think anybody says their military has as much capability as ours, but we have to be realistic about where they're putting their time, effort, and money. So, for example, they continue to crank out new nuclear weapons every year. We don't. We haven't built a new nuclear weapon since about 1990. And we're trying to keep these old machines, safe and reliable. But Russia's putting a fair amount of effort into that. And you've read what they say about the tactical use of nukes to make up for conventional inferiority. We know what they are capable, or at least their level of sophistication in cyber. They have had some demonstrations, I believe, for our benefit in Syria. And so they can't match us, but they don't have to. And if you see some of the recent press reporting about deployments they've made in Kaliningrad, it's concerning. Part of it is to affect a political purpose especially in Eastern Europe, and we have to deal with that.
Well, I want to keep the chairman, or be sensitive to your time, and to keep the day on schedule. So thank you, Chairman Thornberry. You've been in fine fettle today, and I'm sure you're ready for the new Congress. Thank you.